They turned agreements into sacred rulebooks with pages full of processes and procedures. It's suffocating. And here's something that absolutely amazed me. Every single one of these young, inexperienced employees was able to independently buy a house worth of hundreds of thousands of euros. The same people were entrusted to spend about 10 euros without getting approval from 8 different departments. Isn't that crazy? It doesn't mean you hand over everybody a golden credit card and then let them go wild. Have you ever worked at a company where there's a sign next to the coffee machine that says, "Please clean your cup," and it's underlined with 6 exclamation marks? That's when you know that things are really going wrong in a company. Let me ask you something. Why do most companies still operate like factories from the Industrial Revolution? We're in the 21st century, but businesses are stuck in a 19th century mindset. Because think about it. So many of our modern organizations are built on the same principles that powered the machines of the past. Control and efficiency. Everyone treated like a cog in a wheel, as if humans were just part of the machine. But here's the thing. We are not machines. And this model, in my opinion, is broken. It was never designed to unleash the full potential of people. It was designed to keep them in line, to make them productive within rigid frameworks. Yet companies today still rely on this outdated system, even as they scratch their heads, wondering why creativity and innovation are suffering. I'm convinced that the shift, where the machine must adapt to human nature, is not only necessary, it's inevitable. If businesses fail to make this change, they won't just stagnate in innovation, they will die out. Why? Because people don't want to work for them, or even with them. And no, I'm not saying that companies need to become soft or passive. Quite the opposite. It's about anticipating and aligning with the natural needs of human beings, benefiting both the individual, the collective, and the business itself. To understand where this broken system comes from, you need to understand how businesses were structured during the Industrial Revolution. Henry Ford and Frederick Taylor are just 2 of the many people who shaped this way of thinking. Everybody knows that Ford revolutionized manufacturing with the assembly line, breaking down very complex processes into a repetitive task and making production much more faster and more efficient. It was brilliant for mass production, but it also changed the way companies viewed people. Workers were reduced to parts of a machine, just like the equipment they operated. And then there was Frederick Taylor, who is often credited with creating the first formalized approach to management. And his whole philosophy revolved around efficiency and control. Management comes from the word manage, with a train a horse. Taylor believed that the key to productivity was breaking down tasks, measuring everything, and ensuring workers followed exact processes. He didn't need to understand human motivation or creativity. His focus was purely on output. And this gave birth to the concept of managing people as resources, just like steel. It's why we still call it human resources today. I'm not a resource, are you? But here's the kicker. These approaches were born in a time when the human side of work didn't really matter. Motivation, curiosity, purpose, who cares? They were not even considered, because the people running these factories didn't need to think about them. Workers were hired to perform tasks, not to think, innovate, or grow. They were expected to fit in a machine and do what they were told. And here's the problem. This outdated thinking is still alive and well today. Sure, companies have evolved, but many are still stuck in this mechanical, control-based mindset. Job titles, roles, hierarchies, these are all relics of a system designed to keep people in their place, not to unleash their full potential. The reality is, people aren't cogs in a machine. They have creativity, passion, and a natural drive to contribute in meaningful ways. But the legacy of the Industrial Revolution still lingers, and most organizations treat their employee like just another resource to be managed. And the irony? Many employees accept it. They just play along, letting themselves be defined by job titles and tasks, when they're capable of so much more. I remember in the early days of my company, when we were still very small, nobody had titles. Everyone just did what needed to be done, whether it was washing dishes after lunch, answering the phone at the reception, or unpacking boxes. There was no hierarchy. No rigid division of roles. People helped each other out, and things got done. It was that simple. As the company grew and we hit around 50 employees, we also started to introduce job titles. And that's when the problem started. Suddenly, everything was about these titles, about being a senior executive creative director, a junior account manager, and so on. And people began to cling to their titles like they were badges of honor. And here's the thing, the more important the title, the less they felt they had to do things outside of their specific role. I'm a senior creative director, so why should I clean up the meeting room? Or I'm the head of accounts, so I don't need to help out with packaging those boxes. The titles gave people the reason to avoid tasks they didn't fit their job description. But here's the truth. This isn't how human nature works. Imagine at home, you and your partner have agreed that you cook most of the nights. But if one night you don't cook, does your partner just starve? Of course not. Or is your partner usually cleans up after dinner? Do you leave your dirty dishes on the table just because that's their job? No way. You both pitch in what's needed, because that's how people naturally operate. This isn't even about formal roles. It's just about getting things done as a team. So, as my company grew around 120 people, I realized we had a serious problem. These rigid job titles were holding us back, and it became clear that the titles were getting in the way of collaboration, creativity, and productivity. So I did something drastic. I took away everyone's job title, every single one. At first people were a little bit confused, maybe even a little lost. But something amazing happened. Without titles to define what they could do or couldn't do, people naturally started forming self-managing teams. Whoever had the most knowledge or interest in a particular project would just step up as a leader. Not because it was their job, but because they were the best person for the task. Everyone else contributed based just on their skills and what the project needed, not their title. And suddenly the whole energy of the company changed. People were more engaged, more motivated, and above all, more creative than ever before. We didn't have to tell people what to do. They just did again what was necessary. The company became a true team, where everyone had the freedom and responsibility to contribute. And you know what? It really worked. What we now call Holacracy, we were doing back then, even without realizing it. But taking away management and job titles was just the first step in adapting the machine to human nature. While that move freed people from rigid roles, it was of course not enough by itself. We also need to introduce something much deeper, personal leadership. And this is where we started teaching employees how to take real responsibility, not just for their tasks, but for their decisions, their projects, and even for their personal growth. And now, this might sound simple, but it's actually a huge shift, you see? Because most people have been conditioned to think in a certain way. The system we all grew up, the school, the work, the corporate life, it's been telling us for over 100 years that you need to do what the boss or the manager tells you. Follow orders, meet expectations, and don't step out of line. We've been trained to think of work as something hierarchical. The boss knows best. Do what you're told. Duh. So, when you suddenly take away the hierarchy, people don't automatically know how to step up and take ownership. They've been shaped by the system to believe that leadership and responsibility belongs to somebody else. For example, the manager, the supervisor, or the CEO. That's what the system has conditioned us to think for more than a century. But the truth is, leadership isn't about titles or positions. Personal leadership is about taking ownership of what you do and how you do it, regardless of your role. It's about seeing problems and solving them without waiting for someone to tell you how. It's about taking the initiative, even if it's outside of your formal job description. And here's where the real challenge lies. For employees to break free from the just follow orders mindset, they need to be taught how to think differently. They need to learn that they have the power to shape their own work, to make decisions, and to lead from wherever they are. And this is not something that happens overnight. It requires coaching, guidance, and sometimes unlearning everything they've been taught about what it means to be a good employee. But once people understand this, once they truly embrace personal leadership, it changes everything. They stop looking for direction from above and start taking ownership of their own work. They stop waiting for someone else to solve problems and start thinking creatively about how they can contribute. And when you have a whole company full of people who are empowered to lead themselves, that's when the magic happens. But let's go one step back and talk about why we even call businesses organizations in the first place. Because this too comes from the time of the Industrial Revolution. Think about the word itself, organize. It implies structure, order, and control. And it's exactly what businesses became. Rigid organizations obsessed with processes and procedures. So many businesses today aren't really businesses anymore. They've turned into these fossilized organizations where everything is set in stone. Every single step is defined, documented, and locked into processes to leave no room for flexibility. And then they wonder why there's no innovation, no creativity. They turned agreements into sacred rulebooks with pages full of processes and procedures. It's suffocating. Suffocating. Imagine living your personal life like that. Could you imagine running your household with a rulebook that dictates every single action? Sure. There might be a few basic rules. Maybe you share the responsibility of grocery shopping, or you eat together around a certain time. Just basic guidelines to keep things running smoothly. But what if it was all written down like a law? You'd go crazy, no? Unless you're running a nuclear power plant or flying a plane, there's no need for all these rigid rules. Businesses, especially, make people brain dead with this endless regulation. Have you ever worked at a company where there's a sign next to the coffee machine that says, "Please clean your cup," and it's underlined with 6 exclamation marks? That's when you know that things are really going wrong in that company. Look, rules have their place, but businesses have gone overboard, turning into organizations where every single task is prescribed. The result? People lose the ability to think for themselves. They stop innovating. They stop creating. They become slaves of the system, following the rulebook rather than using their minds. Now, introducing personal leadership, teaching employees to take responsibility, and throwing those sacred rulebooks in the trash can have far-reaching consequences. One of the biggest questions people ask is, how do you control things like budgets? After all, when you remove rigid structures, job titles, and traditional management, who decides how the money is spent? Well, at the time I was implementing these changes, most of my employees were in the late 20s. It was in that stage of life where many of them were looking to buy the first house. And here's something that absolutely amazed me. Every single one of these young, inexperienced employees was able to independently buy a house worth of hundreds of thousands of euros. And they weren't real estate agents. Most of them never bought a home before, and yet they figured out how to negotiate the mortgage, choose the right house, set up an insurance, and make one of the biggest financial decisions of their life, all on their own. And yet, within mine and other companies, the same people were entrusted to spend about 10 euros without getting approval from 8 different departments. Isn't that crazy? These employees were perfectly capable of handling complex financial transactions in their personal lives, but within the business, we didn't trust them to manage even the smallest amount. Well, that was a big wake-up call for me. If we trust people to buy a house, something far more complicated than most business decisions, why don't we trust them to handle budget at work? It's about trusting that each employee can make responsible decisions about spending, and giving them the autonomy to manage costs is a fundamental part of connecting the machine to human nature. And does that mean there's no accountability? Absolutely not. You can still have controls in place, but these come after the fact, not before. It doesn't mean you hand over everybody a golden credit card and then let them go wild. It's about trusting that people will make the right decision, because just like they do in their personal lives, they understand the value of money and the responsibility that comes with it. In fact, when you trust people with responsibility, they often rise to the occasion. They think more carefully about how money is spent. They make smarter decisions, and they're more invested in the outcome. You don't need layers of approval and bureaucracy when you give people the freedom to act. What you need is trust. Trust that people are capable of managing budgets just like they were managing their own lives. And when you combine that trust with accountability and personal leadership, you get a system that's far more efficient, far more human, and far more successful. But here comes the most important part of this entire conversation. Why is it that when an average employee steps into the office, they leave a huge part of themselves at the door. It's as if the person who walks into the workplace isn't the same person they were before. Their opinions, behaviors, talents, and even their core beliefs all left behind. Like they've suddenly become somebody else, just because they're at work. Some employees, and even companies, actually encourage this. They promote the idea of being strict separation between work and personal life. And you're not supposed to talk about your private life at work, and vice versa, of course. Work is work, home is home. But why? Where does this belief come from? This mindset, in my belief, also has roots in the old way of thinking about work, the Industrial Revolution mentality, where you just are part of the machine, and the only thing that matters is what you produce. Personal matters, emotion, and individuality didn't belong in the factory or at the office. Work was purely transactional, a place where you left your personal life behind and get the job done. But let me tell you, it doesn't have to be this way. The whole idea of separating work and personal life is, in my belief, outdated, and it's missing the bigger picture. And it's all about connecting to something called the big why of a company. Because the big why is the deeper reason why a company exists. It's beyond making money or ensuring survival. It's the contribution of the company making something bigger than itself, something meaningful that employees can truly connect with. It's not about the what or the how. It's about the why, and then I mean the big why. Why does this business matter? What does it stand for? What's its purpose beyond its profit? When employees can align themselves with your big why, they don't just come to work for a paycheck. They come to work with their hearts, not just their wallets. They become truly engaged because they're working for something they really truly believe in. They work for something that means more than just a salary or the company's bottom line. So this big why is the real secret to how the machine must adapt to human nature. It's not about compartmentalizing people into work and personal versions of themselves. It's about allowing employees to bring their whole self to work. Because when people care about the big why of a company, they stop leaving parts of themselves at the door. They come to work as a complete individual with passion, creativity, and a sense of purpose that goes far beyond what's written down in their job description or their task description. I believe this is the future of work. A place where people don't have to check their hearts at the door, where they can connect deeply with what they're doing, and where the company's purpose aligns with the human need for meaning. That's how we truly connect the machine to human nature. And it's the key to unlocking the full potential of every single person in the company. So ask yourself, is your company a machine that forces people to check their humanity at the door? Or is it a place where people can bring their whole selves, connect with a bigger purpose and thrive? The future of work depends on your answer.